In this video, I want to talk about Viktor Orban. He's the Prime Minister of Hungary, and he's driven Hungary into being the last place, the poorest nation in Europe. Despite what you've heard, perhaps in conservative media, he's not a good guy. He's presiding over illiberal democracy. He's a kleptocrat. That means he's stealing stuff for himself. He's just bad all the way around. He's not a conservative in any meaningful sense. He's a thief. And I'm going to talk about him and his rise to power. So let's start here. Viktor Orban, Hungary's pro-Kremlin strongman, is obstructing Ukraine's bid to join the EU. Again. Now, what he does is regularly, every 6 months or so, they have to vote on something in the EU that requires a unanimous vote. And he will say, I'm not going to support Ukraine for NATO or for the EU or for this or that or the other thing. And they buy him off because essentially Viktor Orban, you understand him best if you think about him like a mafia boss, like the Godfather. Like that's the way that he functions. So he gets his bribe and then he goes away and he's quiet for a little while. Okay, so that's happening here, having looted Hungary into the position of poorest nation in the EU. The Russian-backed Orban regime continues to collapse in the polls. So they really are. I'll show you that in just a little bit. I'm also going to interview Jason J. Smart, and you'll see what he has to say about Viktor Orban in just a little bit as well. So he's at the NATO conference the other day and says, if we invited Ukraine into the EU, we would also be inviting war. No. He's buddies with Putin, and he's not going to do anything that's going to cross Putin. But that's exactly the wrong way of going about this. He also said this: Putin is not the main threat. We are stronger. The real danger is losing our position in global trade. You're at the NATO conference. What are you talking about? NATO is not about global trade. NATO is a military alliance. But he just doesn't want to do anything to cross Putin. The main threat is actually Putin. That's what all the Baltic states are bracing against, is the threat of Russia. And then he said, NATO has no business in Ukraine. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Neither is Russia. And my job is to keep it as it is. But again, as the defensive alliance, it was because of the threat that is Russia. Russia is invading Ukraine that destabilizes Europe. And so it is a threat. Now, his poll numbers are pretty bad right now. This was about a week ago. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban could be ousted as support for the opposition party TISA surges. The new opposition force has not only overtaken the ruling Fidesz party, but now holds significant lead around 15%. TISA currently polls at 51%, with Fidesz stands at 36%. So he could be out of power by next February. Hungary's next parliamentary elections are scheduled for spring of 2026. Okay, so I asked Jason J. Smart to tell me what he understands about Orban, because Orban's just a puzzle to me. Why so buddy-buddy with Putin? Why is it so connected to American conservatives in the United States? And Jason, thank you for joining me. I've been trying to understand what's going on with Orban. And so thank you for going out of your way to answer this question for me. We were just doing another video on your channel, and I really appreciate your insights because you're plugged in over in Kyiv. How do you perceive what Orban's doing? Because he's an enigma to me.
So Orban is probably one of the most interesting leaders in Europe because he is an enigma. He's so much different than every other leader, not only because he's quite openly pro-Russian, I would argue, similar to Fico over in Slovakia, but what makes his different is that his argumentation for it is unique. So obviously everything he says, like not supporting Ukraine, is really about just supporting Hungary's national interest. He says it's not in our national interest to have a conflict with Russia. It's not our national interest to not buy Russian gas. We should continue buying it because it's cheaper for our people. And this is always the argument he uses. It's never because he wants to help Russia. He never says that. But there's something else to this, is that within his own country, they've had a very successful campaign of convincing people from abroad, namely conservatives, to come and support them. So I said as an example, Tucker Carlson's father was a lobbyist for the Hungarian government. We know that a number of people on the alt-right as well as Christian conservative authors have moved to Hungary in recent times or had trips there.
It's so weird.
CPAC had its conference there. So yes.
So CPAC is related to it, and that's if you don't know, the big conservative conference. And the Heritage Foundation is like all in on Orban. and Tucker Carlson is all in on Orban, and like he's not a good guy. Like I understand some of the political positions are lined up, but he's not a good guy. He's made Hungary the poorest in Europe. He's a kleptocrat. He just it's all bad. Like he's famous for a liberal democracy. Like we're not in American conservatives, we're not for a liberal democracy. We're for democracy and but not taking rights away from others in the process. Like we complain about the left doing that. So why on the right would like that's we shouldn't want that. But somehow we've decided, I'm when I say we, I say the Republican Party has decided that they're somehow chummy with Orban. I don't get it.
So I think that ultimately Orban, it's not really about ideology. I think in the end of the day, it's about finances. So we know that there's a lot of things that are very questionable, corruption that's associated with him and his family, namely the building, for instance, of structures in his own village where he's from, and things where the capital outlays seem to somehow benefit his family disordinately. Now, why this all matters? That's where I think that Russia fits into this. And I really do believe that Russia is somehow tied to this, though I cannot yet prove it. Because we see who, for instance, the Russian Orthodox Church sent to go live in Budapest and work with somebody who's close to the Kremlin. There seems to be some coordination there. And I think that using the traditional fronts that Russia uses, Russia always uses a few different fronts. One is religion. Why religion? Because
Mhm.
nobody wants to touch it. Who wants to go investigate or prosecute a church? It looks bad. It sets off red flags everywhere. And you know what? Every other religious group in the country will happily sign a petition saying that they oppose that because they probably in good faith would assume that this church being attacked is being attacked because it's a church and it deserves to be free without the government oppressing it. That's not really what's happening. The church
Mhm.
is just simply a Trojan horse. And that's what the Russian Orthodox Church operates as in other countries. But we see that's how they try to get closer with the Christian conservatives as well as with the Catholics that are conservative in the US and other countries. And there's another aspect of this aside from their myth that Russia is a Christian country, which it is not. In fact, in St. Petersburg, regular church attendance is 0.8% of the population or less.
Yeah.
So it's totally a myth. But neither here nor there. There's another aspect is about the conservatism. If you frame what you're doing as being in your national interest, America first, or
Yeah.
if you Brexit, whatever this issue happens to be, you're doing it at the interest of your own people, not because you're against anyone, but because I'm in favor of my own people. That's an argument that's much easier to accept, and it's you could skip out the part and totally leave out the part that you're being paid to do this. That Russia would like you to do this. You're doing it simply because you're putting your people first. And Orban, if you look at his statements, he never says he's doing something to help Russia. He says, "I'm doing what is best for the Hungarian people." And which Hungarian is going to say, "Well, I don't like that." Maybe he's interpreting it wrong, but he's saying, "I'm doing it
Yeah.
really for our people." And that's, I think, where the Americans actually failed in the messaging about defending why we should support Ukraine, is because they never said, "This is for our people that we're helping Ukraine." It always seemed that we were just giving away gifts to Ukraine, and that was a mistake. The way that it should
Mm.
be phrased from the beginning was, "This is for us that we must do this. This is a fight that we are in, which protects our interest."
Yeah, I think that's spot on. We have made poor arguments for why we should be supporting Ukraine or why we shouldn't. I think even more powerful would be why we shouldn't allow Russia to do this because of the antipathy that we generally have. Russia is a strategic adversary, has historically been a strategic adversary over time. You don't have to fight with them, but look, this is their disposition and this is what we have experienced over time. So I think making that argument might even be stronger. With Orban, do you think he's going to last? Because again, his polling numbers are in the toilet right now, and he's going to be the election campaign is like next like February or something. So he's got a while still in office. Do you think he'll do more damage, and do you think he'll last?
So there's a few different things going on. We know that in the polling that's come out, the numbers aren't looking good for him. It looks like he's down by 10 points in a lot of the polls. So a double digit lead is pretty big. Keep in mind, in politics, anything more than a 5% spread is considered to be a landslide. So when you're down by 10 points, that's a lot. Now, he's facing an opponent who's quite serious. He's very popular. The opponent with the last name Magyar, conveniently enough,
Hmm.
is someone who is shown a lot of public support. That we see that people are coming to the rallies in large numbers, and the population is getting tired of Orban. Of course, like in every country, that's largely due to domestic issues, not to his foreign policy, though they're not pleased with that either. It does not seem that the Hungarians have very fond memories of the Russians, as we remember what the Soviets did in 1956 to Hungary. Another
Right.
thing,
So that's part of the issue that I have with them. Like you would think that the Hungarians would be going, the 60s weren't all that hot. We remember what you did. The Baltic states remember, Poland remembers, Finland remembers. Like how is memory so weak in Hungary? Because, or well, maybe it's just that there's a split between the Orban government and the people. Is that what's at play?
Well, that's exactly. So there is a split, and I think that that's part of where his problems are coming from. I mean, no matter what happens next, he's facing a couple of different problems. One is that any leader that's in power for a long time, it's very hard to get new support because because people already know who you are. To convince somebody who doesn't like you to start liking you is hard. But if they already know who you are and they like you can always sort of lose support. At that point, people become more and more, I'm getting tired of him, and they just sort of fade away. But getting new people to come to you is much more difficult.
Mm,
So I think that he, as a person, is really, this election will ultimately be a referendum on him as a leader.
mm,
He is the prime minister. He's not the president, but it is a vote for his party. But ultimately, who is the face of that party within Hungary? It is Mr. Orban. And I know people who worked or work with Orban, and it's been sort of interesting is that, and I've obviously tried to see what really was going on there, and to convince them to be more useful to us in the Ukraine fight. But what I've realized is that their arguments are always succinct and always on point, as they say. It's always never about Russia. It's never about Ukraine. It's never about NATO. It's, we have to help the Hungarian people first and foremost. What is wrong with me prioritizing the needs of the Hungarian people? I received the Hungarian tax dollars to help the Hungarian people and not to be involved in foreign conflicts, but to help the Hungarian people. That's my priority. And it's very hard to convince people to the contrary.
mhm.
If you understand that this is actually in your national interest, why defending Ukraine helps Hungary, that's one thing. But if that argument's not being made, it's quite the opposite. There's not enough money for everybody. Well, guess what? We hear that exact same argument in the United
Yep.
States. We hear that exact same argument in other places. It's not original to Hungary, but it's the same argument that's being used across many countries.
Do you have any sense, I mean, other than that Tucker's dad was, involved, whatever, do you have any sense of why ideologically Tucker seems to line up here? Like, this is just a weird thing number 3 to me. It's like, if you don't, you don't. I don't get that. Like, illiberal democracy is not what conservatives are supposed to be supporting, right? I
Uh,
mean, I didn't sign up for that at least.
So, I think in the case Tucker Carlson specifically, I think he does it for money, and the reason is simple: is that we know that in private he has said and he's written enough things that were against Trump that makes it clear that his perspective is not that Trump is a genius. Yet he does it. Why does he do it? Why does he then come out on TV every day and act like he's the center of MAGA and he's totally behind it? I think he makes money. He understands that's his audience. He understands that's a target audience. He has to
Mm,
repeat these lines because it's what's useful. Keep in mind, his father was a political consultant, and political consultants as a whole are known to be advising people, politicians, to say whatever your population wants to hear to get elected.
mhm.
And he's doing exactly that. He is giving them this populism that they want to hear, MAGA populism, and that's why he does it. I think that's really what the interview with Vladimir Putin, for instance, was about. Was it really journalism? No, it wasn't. The interview with Dugan. Why didn't he ask Dugan hard questions? When he asked Dugan what he thinks about the United States, why? Because he didn't want to hear the outcome. It wasn't going to be
Yeah.
supportive. He wanted his audience to hear something that was going to be supporting his argument that these are not our enemies.
Yeah, they would have a hard time hearing, "Well, you're the West, you're in decline, and you're gonna be overrun pretty soon, so don't worry about it."
No,
Like, that's
exactly.
not what they wanna hear from Dugan.
Exactly. So that's the whole thing, is it's a show. I think that we have to really understand what it is that it's for entertainment purposes. It's not to be taken as news. He's not actually there to persuade or to give the real perspective as to what's happening, to get the real views of what people are saying. He's there to simply get the applause of his crowd, to get as many clicks as he can. Hence why he releases these trailers before every interview comes out that are 15 seconds or 30 seconds long, like the recent one with Senator Ted Cruz. He releases them because he knows it's clickbait. It's really
Mhm.
interesting. You go, oh, now it's worth watching the full interview. It's just a business. I think it's really just a business. But overall, why are the Republicans moving this direction? That is a fascinating question because there is a substantial number. In fact, last summer, a journalist from Politico reached out to me to discuss this. And the journalist was specifically interested in discussing that. They were researching, and it's a well known journalist, they were researching specifically Republican leadership and Christian conservative leadership who was involved in Hungary and what the tie was to Hungary and how Hungary
Yeah,
was working through conservative organizations. So, long story short, is that Hungary depends on a couple different things, such as it has an initial batch of conservatives. Let's say it's the Heritage Institute. I'm not saying that they literally did this, but I'm using them as an example. They convinced them to come on board. Heritage has a couple conferences there, or CPAC has conferences there. It then places Hungary in the perspective of as being aligned, that it's conservative or it's Christian, and it's a
mhm.
society that's aligned with these existent beliefs in the United States. From there on out, people are already susceptible to believe anything else they hear. Very few Americans have any idea where Hungary is located, let alone know what the Hungarians think on any issue. But if they hear that that's really the home of Christian conservatism, they're susceptible to believe it. That's why they believe that Russia is the home of Christian conservatism.
Right.
What's sort of fascinating, which I'll mention as an aside, I apologize, but I'll mention as an aside because it is interesting. One of the first priorities of Russia when they occupy parts of Ukraine is actually to track down Protestant churches and destroy them and arrest the
Yep.
pastors. The persecution
Great.
of Christians in eastern Ukraine and the Catholics, by the way, they also persecute the Catholics, is a major topic for them.
Yeah.
And it's sort of fascinating. The Russian government seriously believes that, in the case of the Protestants, that these churches are somehow affiliated with the CIA. This is a commonly held belief amongst them.
Really?
And they believe that, yes, and there's the logic being, there's a lot of logic to why this is, but part of this is that they see that within Russia, they can monitor these groups, they can keep an eye on them, but this is a new territory. It's very difficult, so it's better to just close them down and fully persecute them. Because when they search within those churches, they often find things like the financial records. The financial records show that they get seed money from churches in the United States. Based upon that, they say, look, it's being
Ah,
washed in the United
well, that's
States
just
via these churches.
missionary activity,
It's missionary,
right? But
exactly, exactly.
okay.
And they interpret that as being quite clear evidence that it's being the American taxpayers are really using this Life Covenant Church in Tennessee to send money to Eastern Ukraine because they're trying to, create spies or foment revolution.
I think
Uh,
that's because that's what you would do,
yeah, well, that's
right?
what
So if that's
I
what
would
you would do, that's what you think that they're doing, and that's not what they're
exactly,
doing, right?
exactly. It's because that's the way Russian Orthodox Church, as we described, is being used precisely for this purpose.
Right.
And that's not just invented. I mean, they have arrested, and you can easily find on Google the number of times that Russian Orthodox priests have been investigated and arrested entering the United States because on their laptops they found things such as targets in the United States that they were to track down. But once again, it is a perfect cover story being a priest or using the church because people are very hesitant to get behind the persecution of a church for logical reasons. But at the same time, it doesn't show an appreciation. That's how Russia always walks this very interesting line, using diplomacy, using things like the role of a journalist
Hmm.
to then go out and do espionage.
Hmm.
The Americans avoid that. Actually, the Americans historically avoid using the cover in our intelligence work of being from clergy, from being or missionary, the cover of press, the cover of U.S. aid, or the cover of Peace Corps. And the reason was because specifically they wanted to avoid the persecution of Americans in other countries or them being suspect. So they
Hmm.
avoided those covers. The Russians, on the opposite, they see that as a great window of opportunity.
Yeah.
And so they do.
That's fascinating. By the way, so we've gotten through all those questions about Orban. I just want to put a little pitch out to say, watch A Faith Under Siege if you have not done that before, because that will help you understand, and send that to all your conservative friends and family. That's like, I don't know why we should support Ukraine. Aren't they persecuting the Christians? Because Tucker Carlson said so. Let them see that for themselves, and then just frame it in like this, like, hey, I watched this documentary, can you tell me why this is the case? Because you said that Russia's doing, like, just ask them a question, and let them have to wrestle with it. But as for Orban, thank you for all your insight. I really do appreciate this. That helps me tremendously in processing him, because he's a really interesting character who I've just had a hard time with. Jason and I just did a video. It'll be out, if it's not already out, on his channel. What's the name of your channel?
Jason J. Smart, just my
Uh,
name.
Jason J. Smart on YouTube, and go see that video if you want to hear another conversation. Thank you, Jason, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Hey, great talking with you as always.